Welcome to part 1 on our How to Build an Upper Receiver video here on AR Build Junkie. Today we're going to go over the first step, which is installing your forward assist. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to the good folks over at Dirty Bird Industries. Thank you for providing all of the parts that we needed for this build series. So now let's look at what you're going to need to do this step. Obviously you'll need your upper receiver. You're going to need your forward assist, your forward assist spring, and the forward assist roll pin. Tools needed for this are pretty simple. You're going to want some way to stabilize your upper receiver. I like these universal bench blocks. You'll need an armorer's hammer, preferably one with a brass or nylon head. To drive in your roll pin, you can use a standard punch, but the preferred tool is a roll pin punch. This one is a 3/32 roll pin punch. This is the preferred tool. So to start, we're going to take our forward assist and install our forward assist spring. Now, when you're placing your forward assist into the hole in the receiver for it, you want to make sure of how it's oriented. The hook that you see here right on the end of your forward assist, you want the curved part of this hook to face in towards the inside of the receiver. So we're going to install it just like this. Now, when you're driving your roll pin in, it's a good idea before you put your forward assist in to go ahead and get it started so it's held in place for you. Because what we're going to need to do is put our forward assist on spring tension so we can drive our roll pin all the way into place, and then when we release, the forward assist will be captured. Alright, so we've got that good and in place, so that's started. Next we're going to insert our forward assist, making sure that we've got our hook oriented correctly. Now what I like to do is put my hand in this position here so that I can put my roll pin punch in place and then hold it with my two fingers. Okay, so now we have our forward assist installed. Give it a function check. Everything appears to be working. And now we've completed step 1 in assembling our upper receiver. Alright guys, thank you for joining us for part 2 of our How to Build an AR Upper Receiver video series. Today we're going to be installing our desk cover. Now for this installation you're going to need 4 parts. You're going to need your desk cover, also called an ejection port cover. You're going to need the ejection port cover rod and the small C-clip that comes with that. And then you're going to need your ejection port cover spring. Now for this, the tools couldn't be any simpler on this. All you're going to need is a pair of needle nose pliers, and that's for installing the C-clamp or C-spring onto your ejection port rod. So that's the first step we're going to do here. Now on this, these little C-clips can be very easy to lose, so it's a good idea to have a spare on hand or to work in a very well lit area that contrasts with the color on the C-clips so you can find those if they do go flying. But basically you're going to grab the C-clip on the side opposite of the opening on the C-clip. And we're going to grip it firmly and then install it right on the little notch that you see in the end of your ejection port cover rod. Now with that clip firmly in place in the notch that's in the rod, we're ready to move on to the next step. Now basically the way that your desk cover works is this rod is going to go straight through, and that C-clip stops it on this end. And what holds that in this direction is going to be your hand guard over here. And when fully installed, your desk cover is going to be in this position. with your spring like so. Now, the way that this works is it's going to be under spring tension. The long arm on your spring is going to be over on the right side in this indentation in your dust cover. The short leg of the spring over here is going to be under spring tension, and what we're going to do is when we put it into place, we're going to take this spring and wrap it under 180 degrees so that there's spring tension pushing the door open. So you're going to slide your rod into place until it just is outside of the opening in your dust cover here. And then to get your spring started, we're going to line it up so that the long leg is on this recess in your dust cover. Now we're going to spin this around. Now it can be handy to use those needle nose pliers to help you keep the spring in place. And we're just going to push that through until it captures. And then finish pushing our rod into place. Now we have our spring in, and you can tell that you've got this correctly installed when your long leg is down in that recess, and the short leg is shown right here just above your dust cover. Now to test installation, we're going to go ahead and close it, and then just use our finger to push it open. And it should spring out into position here, and then we know this is a working dust cover. Alright, so we are back for part 3. Today we're going to do installation of the barrel and the gas system. Now as far as parts you're going to need for today's video, obviously you're going to need your barrel nut, and then for the gas system you're going to have your gas tube, gas block, and the roll pin for the gas block. Tools you're going to need for today's installation, you're going to need a torque wrench, armorer's hammer, a bench block to rest your gas block on while you're doing the installation of the roll pin, a 5/64 roll pin punch. On most gas blocks, you'll have set screws that'll hold that in place. For that, you're typically going to use an Allen key. Pay attention to your manufacturer's instructions on installing the gas block in case there's a different securing method that you're going to use. Now, for installation of the barrel nut, typically you're going to have something like this. This is what's called a crowfoot wrench. Now, depending on the design of your barrel nut, there are a few other things that you might be able to use. You also, if you have a different design than this more standard barrel nut, you may get something that looks like this, for example, with ribbed grooves on the outside of the barrel nut. Typically, when you get something like this, your manufacturer of your handguard is going to include a wrench. And just like on our crowfoot wrench, it'll have a spot in here for the shaft on your torque wrench. Another thing you're going to want to have on hand is going to be some aeroshell grease. And we're going to use this for a couple different spots on this part of the installation. We're going to put this on the extension on your barrel. We're also going to put this on the inside and outside of the upper receiver extension so that the barrel nut threads on smoothly and you don't get any binding. Now the first thing we're going to do in this step is go ahead and put together our gas block so that that's ready to go when we have our barrel installed. And now you're going to notice when you look at your gas block, if you've got a low profile gas block like this, because we're installing a free float tube today, you're going to notice you have a hole that's on either side to install your roll pin in. And then on your gas tube, the end that goes into your gas block is going to have a series of holes. You've got one large hole on the underside of your gas tube, and that's going to mate with the hole on the inside. See if I can get that in the camera there. On the inside of your gas block to allow the gas system to function. Now you'll notice on the very end, two smaller holes that go straight through. That's going to be where your roll pin goes through. Now when you're installing this, you're going to insert your gas tube into the hole in your gas block here, and you're going to make sure the large hole here is facing down. And then you'll look through the hole for your roll pin to make sure that the hole in your gas tube lines up. And then we'll go ahead and install our roll pin. Alright, now once you've made sure that it's flush on both sides, you've got your gas block fully assembled. We'll go ahead and set that to the side and move on to the next step. Now for our next step, we're going to go ahead and grease up our barrel nut and barrel extension. We'll get out our aeroshell grease. Now, there are a few other greases that you can use on here. Aeroshell grease is going to be the mil-spec standard grease that you want to use on this. I personally use this on all my AR-15s. Of course, you go online, you're going to get other opinions about what should be used here. I've heard everything from white lithium grease like you typically use on an AK to axle grease, things like that. I choose to stick with the mil-spec standard aeroshell grease, and for most beginners I would suggest doing the same thing. So once we've got the inside of our barrel nuts, all of the threaded portions, we're going to be done with that. And we're going to move on to the extension of our barrel. You want to make sure you get a good liberal coating on here so that nothing binds when you're trying to install your barrel. And you just want to make sure that you don't go past the shoulder here on your barrel extension. All it's going to do is put a little excess grease somewhere where it's not really going to help, so you want to avoid that. Okay, that looks pretty good. And like I said, on our upper receiver, we're going to do the outside of the receiver extension and the inside here. And here you want to go pretty light. This usually, for me, gets the least amount of grease because you've already got some on your barrel nut. This is just a little extra insurance added here. We'll wipe this all down once we get our barrel installed and make sure everything's nice and clean. And we're going to put just a little bit right in here, just to make sure nothing binds. Okay, that looks pretty good. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and install our barrel in here. So for that, we're going to change positions, and I'll see you back up top. Alright, so now we have our upper receiver in our vise block and secured in our vise. Now we're going to proceed to installing the barrel. Now on your barrel, you'll notice there's a little indexing point, which is this little notch right here in your barrel extension, and that's going to mate with the notch in the top of your receiver extension. Alright, now that we've got our barrel in place, we're going to go ahead and wipe off the excess grease. Give it a little wipe there, not taking away all the grease. And then we're going to thread on our barrel nut. Alright, now that we've got our barrel nut in place, now is when we're going to get out our torque wrench and our crowfoot wrench. Now, one thing we want to talk about with barrel nuts is this one is actually a great design. This is a very common style of barrel nut. You'll notice that it's smooth all the way around the outside edge. And one of the good things about this is this does not require to be timed to a certain position. Now, what timing refers to is around the outside face of this. You know, picture this like a clock, with 12 o'clock being here, 6 o'clock being here. With a lot of barrel nuts, you have to worry about what position they're in. Take this one, for example, that we looked at earlier. Your gas tube needs to line up with one of these notches, which means it will need to line up with your gas port opening here at the top of your upper receiver. Now, that can be a problem because each manufacturer specifies what foot-pound of torque that your barrel nut needs to be tightened to. For example, this one from Dirty Bird Industries specifies 40 to 50 foot-pounds of torque. Now that can be a problem when you get your barrel nut to the proper torque and then it doesn't quite line up.
Sometimes you'll be, no matter where you are in the usually 10 foot-pounds of play that you have when installing your barrel nut, you might be in between a notch and not be able to line up your gas block properly. So a lot of companies will include these. These are little metal rings called shims that you can use to push the barrel nut slightly out from your receiver face, which will then allow it to line up. And usually there'll be 3 or 4 so you can put them on as you need them. With this one though, like I said, it's not going to require that because it doesn't matter where we are around the outside here, your gas tube is going to flow right over it. So we just need to worry about getting it to the between 40 and 50 foot-pounds of torque. All right, now that we've got our barrel nut down to the proper torque, we're going to go ahead and move on to installing our gas system. Alright, so now that we have our barrel nut installed, we're going to go ahead and move on to doing our gas system. You're going to slide your gas block straight over your barrel, lining up your gas tube with the gas port in the upper receiver. And now when you're lining everything up here, you want to make sure that everything is in line left to right, and that your gas block is pushed all the way up to the neck portion of your barrel. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten down the 2 set screws on the underside of our gas block. Alright, so now that we have our barrel nut and our gas system installed, we're done with this part of the build process. Alright, so now we're going to move on to our 4th and final step in building our upper receiver. Now this is going to be a multi-part step where we're going to install our handguard. We're also going to put on our muzzle device and install our bolt carrier group and charging handle. Now, as far as parts, you're going to need obviously your handguard and any mounting hardware that goes with that, your muzzle device and a crush washer. A peel washer can also be used. I prefer crush washers. That's typically the standard that you're going to see for installing your muzzle device. You're also going to need your bolt carrier group, your charging handle, and your almost completed upper receiver assembly. Now, as far as tools, there should only be 2 tools that you need. You're going to need whatever tool that you'll use to install your handguard. In this case, we're going to use an inch-pound torque screwdriver. And then you'll need something to install your barrel device, which can either be an armorer's wrench or an adjustable wrench like this one here. Now, there's a couple considerations you want to make when moving on to this step. The size of your muzzle device is going to dictate whether you put it or the handguard on first. Since this is a lower profile one, we can install our handguard first. If this were fatter or like a cookie cutter style from Strike Industries, something like that, you're going to want to install that after your handguard. So we'll go ahead and install our handguard. We're just going to slide that right over. And we're going to make sure everything mates up here. Now with a lot of handguards on a forged style receiver, you're going to see the little tabs or something to line everything up. And basically you want to make sure that the top up here, the rail sections line up, and these tabs go over your upper receiver. And then we're going to go ahead and install our screws. Now this one uses 2 Allen head screws. Now with these screws, it can be a good idea to go ahead and put a little bit of blue Loctite. We're not going to do that today because we're doing this for demonstration, but that is a good step to do here. So now when moving on to the mounting hardware and installing, you want to pay attention to manufacturer's instructions. With this particular handguard from Dirty Bird Industries, they specify 30 to 40 inch-pounds of torque on this screw, so that's what we have our torque screwdriver set to. Now that click tells us we've gotten to the proper inch-pounds of torque, so we're going to move on to the next one. Alright, and that is our handguard installed. Next, we're going to go ahead and move on to our muzzle device. And one thing you want to note about your crush washer when you're installing this, you'll notice that there are two sides of this crush washer. There's going to be a thinner side, and then there's going to be a cupped side. Kind of like this is shaped like a bowl. Now, the inside of the bowl here, you want that to go towards the outside of your barrel. So we're going to install that just like this. Now when installing your muzzle device, it's a good idea to put a little bit of aeroshell grease on this part as well. So now we're going to go ahead and proceed to thread that on. Now, different muzzle devices, you're going to want to pay attention to how this is timed as well, just like we talked about timing with the barrel nut. Now with these A2 flash hiders, these are pretty simple because there's going to be 5 grooves along the top here, and you're just going to line those up so that the center groove is right in line with the top of your handguard here. And this is where you're going to employ your adjustable wrench to go ahead and put that into place. Now, once you've got this installed, this isn't the final one we're going to do for this build, so we're going to avoid tightening that on this one. Now, once you've got this all installed to the specs that are required by your muzzle device, you're going to move on to your bolt carrier group and charging handle. Alright, now as far as installing your bolt carrier group and charging handle, that's pretty simple. On the side of your charging handle, you're going to notice these little tabs here, and those are going to mate with an opening in the top of your upper receiver. And you'll notice once it gets into that groove, it'll slide freely up here in the top section. And now that we've got our charging handle in place, we're going to go ahead and flip over our upper. Now that we've got everything turned upside down, we're going to go ahead and install this so that your gas key on your bolt carrier group is facing forward toward the gas tube. So we're going to install everything upside down. Now one thing you want to make sure of is when you're putting your bolt carrier group in, you want to make sure that your bolt is pulled all the way out, like so. So the pin that's holding this in place should be all the way in the forward position as well, and your bolt should be as far forward as it can go. Next, we're going to flip our bolt carrier group upside down and rest our gas key into the groove into the underside of your charging handle. Then everything will just slide right into place there, and then click into place. And then you'll notice your dust cover comes out. So we'll reinstall that. And now we have a fully assembled upper receiver. Now, as far as functioning of the rifle, this is a complete upper receiver. This is going to be the point where you're going to make choices about what kind of sights you want to have on top, whether you want to go with just a set of iron sights, or if you want to install a red dot optic, something like this, or a scope. Really, the sky's the limit. With standard Picatinny rails, you can install a variety of different kinds of sights. And that would be really the only thing you have left to do before you go ahead and install this into your completed lower receiver.